Welcome to Varn Vlog. And normally I would have our video streaming for you today with the song, but I don't think I'm going to do that. This is a more informal and reflective video. And while I may be interacting with the chat today a little bit, most of this will be a monologue that is really about some upcoming changes here at Varn Vlog. You'll notice that the branding is changing and that I have been less inclined to release as much material. I have been overproducing. I discovered basically from input from my patrons and from actual downloads and video responses that when I put out material slightly less often, it actually had a higher percentage of engagement because I guess people would just become overwhelmed. Now, as a teacher who does actually design online coursework sometimes, I should know that. I know, for example, if I condense assignments and put it under one assignment as opposed to 4 or 5 separate assignments, students are more likely to do it. And in many ways, my audiences aren't that different from students. And that brings me to the purpose of today's monologue. And that is purposiveness itself. There are a lot of changes coming in my relationship to my other side gigs. None of this is my day job. All 3 media ventures I do together would be less than a fifth of my income. I am not of the tier of podcaster or vodcaster or vlogger who can survive off of their patronage, particularly since I also work with and am in a partnership with a producer, Paul Channelstrip, who is effectively, half of this. You never see Paul. Paul is more active in his work on the anti-flautist Twitch streams. But when we orientate ourselves here at Varn Blog, the first person I talk to is Paul. Secondly, there is the relationship that I have formerly to Zero Books. And while I don't think I'm in any danger of working for Zero, there's been a lot of discussions about, where stuff is going over there. While my videos over there get 3 to 10 times what they do here. I mean, the average video here gets 900 views, which is, in the terms of YouTube, extremely tiny. But in terms of what Zero has done in the past 3 years, they're probably the least popular thing on the site. Well, that's not true, but they're in the middle tier, and particularly Pop the Left, which even with Doug on it has not been getting the kind of engagement that either one of us would want. The other thing about it, if I'm honest, I have been dismayed at some of the responses to the audience over there as things have changed since the election of Biden. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I'm going to go into that in the actual substantive part of the monologue this time, where I might become a lot more passionate. But suffice it to say that a lot of people either want an easy answer to the malaise they feel, or they want a scene to make them feel justified in their malaise. And I use that term advisedly, malaise, because a lot of people invested a whole lot of political hope into a kind of social democratic project which had no real promise of delivery. The response to that has largely been, if you look at the DSA's most recent polls, there's been a shift even in the people who we would consider the right of the DSA. And when I use terms right, left, and center to refer to socialists, by the way, this is not really this is relative to the socialist spectrum. So when I say right in regards to the DSA, I mean most likely to feel the need to deal with a very slow reformist portion of the Democrats, and also who have a lot of reliance on the federal state. Now, interestingly, if I defined a spectrum within the DSA, that spectrum of right and left would actually probably vary depending on various coordinates that we talk about. Now, that's not sexy or fun. We like to talk about the left as something that actually exists as almost an ideal platonic norm, as if we know exactly what it means. But what we've seen in this crisis, and by the way, if you've been involved in the left for any significant number of years, you will know that crises like this are almost inevitable, that they happen in regards to political cycles. And the fact that they happen in regards to political cycles more than economic ones tells you that they're more downstream of the general political feeling and discourse. Likely, and I hate to say this, but a lot of far left politics is actually the same thing that we saw in a lot of general politics, where the positions taken don't have any real ideological coherence, or maybe not even real any temperamental coherence. And I can talk about what I mean by that in terms of psychology later. But they're really about having a sense of identity and belonging when most other forms of community simply don't fucking exist. The thing about this is this makes politics not political in any meaningful sense, because it's no longer about the orientation and running of a community. It's no longer about the expression or manifestation of different groups, collectives, or class powers. It is about feeling an identification with people who you think share general beliefs, sharing that identification as a form of signification, and using it as to reaffirm your own existence. This is about terror management. It's not about politics. Now, I have been saying over and over and over again for the last 2 months that paraphrase of the Pat Buchanan quote that I give out, that failed politics, failed movements who cannot take political power, mature into businesses, and rot into grifts. I have been thinking about my own relationship to this milieu. You see, Varn blog is almost a vanity project. It started off as a way for me to process my ideas with a group of people, and get you guys to think about what I was thinking about, because I don't really have hard answers for a lot of what I'm dealing with. And in fact, just as a matter of logic, it is always easier, always safer, and always more likely to be true to come up with a negative answer as opposed to a positive one. Most of you use your leftist theory, and this is even true of my fans. And guys, I like you guys, and I think you're smarter than a lot of the fans of other podcasts, but of course I would, because you're my fans, right? That flatters me. But most of you honestly use theory as a way of avoidance. It is a way to feel that you are sure. It is a way to reinforce your identity, to make sure that you have not wasted your time on things that frankly don't matter, because you feel like you need a purpose. Now that's good. This existentialist psychology, as hokey as it may seem, and I'm not going to get into things like whether or not we have agency in any meaningful sense or anything like that, because that is beyond the purview of this speech, but is actually vital for your sense of self-continuity. Ask yourself, why do you care so much that people agree with your ideas? Is it because you have power? Well, obviously, you fucking don't have power most of the time. Maybe you have power in a very limited sphere, but if you look at the online left milieu or even the activist left milieu, and they aren't the same, um, the focus is either on localism as a form of retreat because you have no power over anything global whatsoever, so you can only do things where you feel like you have power locally, or you project upon something bigger, more national or global. You attach to another nation state. You feel like you can identify with something which you are not even an organic constituent to. Unless you live in Brooklyn or her specific district, you are not a constituent of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Unless you are a member of the CPC, you are not a constituent of the Chinese Communist Party or the Communist Party of China, whatever you want to call it. The fact that people become pedants about this actually shows you that what they are trying to do is protect an identity and protect their relationship to that knowledge. It's narcissistic fundamentally. It is not politics in any meaningful sense of that word in its historical instantiations. Now, yes, I will say that words, if we don't get caught into the prestidigitation of language, are flexible. They mean different things at different times. A thought leader is a grifter who's gotten you to believe that you can actually manifest something by believing in what they say. Not all grifters, by the way, are necessarily bad. I mean, we throw this word around now. I started throwing it around 3 years ago. I don't take credit for coining most of these. For example, in 2010, it's the first time I called someone a political LARPer. That term's ubiquitous now. I don't think I'm why it's ubiquitous. I just think I was onto the pulse of a lot of people's personal cultural experience, and that was a natural analogy to come to. It's one of the dangerous things about like trying to be on top of the way people feel. So a thought leader can be a lot of things, right? A thought leader can be a person. If I'm going to be fair, a thought leader can be a person who's just trying to come up with ideas in a certain space and milieu. So they can be like a teacher, they can be a guru, which is kind of, in my mind, when I use the term, that's kind of a toxic form of a teacher. They can be a grifter, but be a lot of things. But if your politics can't change anything and can't manifest politically, and I don't just mean that manifest politically, like politics, that's circular, right? Even as I say it, I realize it's circular. Let's actually take it and break it down a little more. The purpose of most political movements is to represent some form of power in the organization of one's social life. That is a very abstract phrase, but what it means in concrete, sensuous practice is that you can actually change how you live your daily life and how you reproduce that way of being. When you reproduce a way of being, that involves your relations of production in Marxist phraseology. But what that means is the way we actually organize our relationships to do the work of daily life. And you notice that I say work and not labor. All right. Because it's kind of an artificial distinction, but it's something that's kind of important when we talk about labor categories in Marxism. So I don't do that. Now, people use these ideologies for a variety of different ways, but there's a reason why people use ideologies to shut off ideas. You'll hear people call it, it's a cult tactic to shut off ideas. No, all ideological things necessarily cut off some spectrum of belief, and there's almost no way out of it. But does it have sufficient flexibility to incorporate and change with changing data and social situations? If it does, it might be a useful guide to actually how you should arrange things, like your relationships and the way you socially reproduce your life. And that is far ranging. It involves your most intimate relationships, it involves your least intimate relationships, and it involves relationships that are mediated through things you don't realize. When I talk about political scenes and milieus, those actually don't tend to change very much about your life. They tend to be projections of your current life onto another group of people. And it works very much like sports, as someone is saying in the chat right now. It's the same reason you vote for a football team. And in fact, it's become the educated person's means of sport. Hence why there's a tendency for the circular firing squad. Because the stakes that would make loyalty and solidarity more meaningful simply aren't there in a scene or milieu. But the social identification, the need to regulate, because it's an extension of your own self-identity, that is there. We talk about this jokingly in music or art. The less sticks there are, the more vicious things are. But there's a psychological reason for this that is deeper than the flippant phrase we throw around. But there's a reason why people kill each other over soccer matches. There's a reason why people double down on their most idiotic instincts on Twitter. These basic primal instincts of belonging and of purpose, for whatever reason, and I have theories about this that I can't prove. It's not properly scientific, but there's a very real sense in which our ability to attach meaning to an action is crucial to our own psychology and survival. This is something that's deeper than our immediate social construction. All right. This is what distinguishes me from a lot of the left, by the way, is I do actually think there are traits to human beings which are not, purely speaking, total products of our immediate social production. They're part of who we biologically are, what we have evolved to be. Does that mean that these traits are true, are good, are even necessarily healthfully adapted? Not really. But it's something you have to deal with. But what makes it even more, this is the insight of Marxism, I think, one of the primal insights of the Marxist view of human social relations, is that that natural biological urges are constrained by the way we organize our society, by the way we input into our society. Yeah. By the way we have to economically reproduce ourselves. And even that is a little bit misleading because, for example, I've been talking to people about how you can't just pretend that culture is totally superstructural and economics is totally base, when relations of production are part of the base, even in the most vulgar forms of Marxism. And culture is part of relationships of production. A lot of it is, from the Marxist standpoint, superstructural, but not all of it. It affects the way we economically organize ourselves, and it affects the way we politically organize ourselves. So a way that we understand this projection of power, we get ourselves confused when we think our identification with an idea set, which, by the way, the kind of terror management theory around this is that the reason why we in a secular world, when we don't really believe in any self-extension beyond the immediate life, the only thing that we know about us that survives our own existence is genetic replication and ideas. So focusing so much on ideas is a way to avoid the reality of death in terror management theory. Now, it's not a totally scientific theory. I don't know how you would actually scientifically prove that statement, so take that with this grain of salt. But that theory has been very explanatory to what I see people do with politics and with the relationship to media figures. I don't love the fact that I think now, if I want to educate you, there's no way out of a parasocial relationship. And the reason why, it's complicated. I don't think you should trust parasocial relationships because they don't truly imply the responsibility to each other that one seems to see. And since most of our models of relationships right now are based on very facile notions of friendship, we also think that we can hold people accountable for our emotional well-being like friends. But that's not what these celebrity figures have ever done. That's not what the political figures really do. If someone is not honest about that limitation for you, they can be taking advantage of you, and there's no way around that. But the flip side to that is that I know from being a teacher, and I've read study after study after study that proves this, that someone's relationship to ideas and education and even learning facts is based on social trust. Do you trust the source? This goes back to ancient, ways of time. I was going to say ancient Greek, but people might pick on me for picking on the old dead white guys, even though they weren't really white by our definition. But whatever. But that's a whole different semantic discussion. But this is also true in rhetorical forms in ancient China, ancient India. I'm pretty sure if we really studied it in indigenous traditions in the Americas, we find it there too. That the appeal to credibility is probably the most important appeal you have. Do you trust your source? Do you like your source? We talk about this in terms in America, we talk about this in terms of racial politics all the time, and there's a truth to it because people, whether we want to really deal with it or not, are ethnocentric. And race is often a shitty proxy, a completely imagined social proxy for kinship and ethnicity. It's a bad social proxy. I mean, if you ever study like genetics or class distributions within a racial group or this, that, and the other, it's not actually a good proxy at all, but it seems natural to us now that it exists in the world. But what's really driving that is identification with the teacher. Can you trust them? Do they have your best interest at heart? And for all the mystifications you hear about this and left-wing media, that is the point. And that is why we seek to make parasocial relations with celebrity figures. Intelligence is getting mentioned a lot in here. I don't want to flatter anybody. One way of flattering your audience is to tell them that everyone else is stupid. I take a different tact. What if I told you that most likely most people are as smart as you, but that doesn't matter? Just statistically speaking, it must be true. Most of you are in a pretty narrow range of intelligence. We can't all be special. The Lake Wobegon effect, to use a phrase from 2 cancellations and 15 years ago. We can't all be above average, as average has any meaning. And even being above average is actually in such a narrow range of abilities that, I mean, yeah, it matters on margin. It might really affect your life. and might really affect your ability to think, but it's actually quite small. So to bring us back to the purpose of Varn blog, due to some of the situations I've been having with other left media, I had a crisis that kind of manifested on air on Monday. If you go back and watch the 4-hour video, and that's 4 hours after I cut 45 minutes of it out, you can actually watch my posture deflate. I knew everything that Jean Michael Cologne was saying. Not a bit of it was new to me. And in fact, we've been kind of in dialogue about this for a long time. It's been things I've been thinking about for at least the past 3 years, since before the Bernie collapse even happened. Some of the trends that have happened were exactly as I predicted, and some of them are far faster and far more serious than I thought. Now, people often come at me that I, am arrogant in my predictions, and I have been wrong on many things. But my track record actually is pretty good. And it's because I don't trust my instincts. All right. I have an instinct not to trust my instincts. So what I do when I'm making a prediction is go, what do people think is going to happen? Looking at objective conditions and the inputs that I can find, what seems most likely to happen, and then what are the various opposed social discourses around that? How are people bracketing things out? What are they not telling themselves? Then I kind of do a Bayesian calculus based on the last few historical times we've seen this. What is most likely to happen? History does not dictate the future, even if it history is not, let me rephrase that, because history might actually dictate the future. Let me rephrase that. History as we know it does not 100% predict any outcome. There's always some contingency, there's some variable, there's something else that can change an outcome. But we cannot rely on the hope that contingency will give us what we want. And in fact, if anything came out of post-structuralism that was really bad in left-wing thought, it was this. That basically we were at the hands of random events and so that a hope for the future was going to come out of basically the rolling the dice as many times to eventually get the numbers that you want. So you cannot really know what the future is going to be, nor can you lay out a program for it. Yeah. That is why actually I do. People don't know this. I don't talk about it a lot. Machiavelli, not in what he wrote in The Prince, but in what he wrote in his other writings on like the Florentine Republic. You can't read out all possible futures, but not all futures are equally possible. All you can base your predictions off of is probability. But if you actually do that and don't rely on like simplistic philosophical determinism or simplistic philosophical adeterminism, it doesn't matter how many. What is most likely to happen? What are the Bayesian probabilities? You can't do Bayesian calculus and everything. For example, like if you're trying to figure out how, like, what's the Bayesian calculus of a socialist revolution? You have like 5 that you could possibly pull from, and we don't agree if they were actually socialist because we don't all have the same definition of the operant conditions. Most of you are caught up in the prestidigitation of language and models. And it's actually funny because it really is an objective regression from the middle of the 20th century. When you ask me what the central contradiction is, what does that even mean? That's a fuzzy logic game. Is the central contradiction to capitalism or imperialism, where they're co-constitutive things? I can tell you, historically speaking, undoing imperialism doesn't seem to undo capitalism. But then again, you could argue that imperialism's never been undone anywhere, so we don't know. We can go on that regression train forever. All I can do is assert one as a primary value. I can't prove it. And people who tell you they can are lying. Amazon isn't the means of production. Amazon's the means of circulation, which, by the way, I know it's hard for people to understand this, but the means of production are being automated, which reduces labor power. It also probably, if you actually buy in labor theory of value, which what most Marxists say they do, but don't act like they actually believe, means that profitability through automation is going to decline. But the automation is a way to weaken weaken labor power. So it's kind of a paradox or a contradiction in the classical sense of the term. The automation is immediately profitable, but in the long term, it turns variable capital into fixed capital. What are you going to do to get closer to the power of automation? You don't have the technical expertise. See, if that's right, then honestly, if we really think that, and I think Aaron Benyev has actually been hitting this at us, if we really take LVT seriously and then look at what's actually happening with seeming profit rates on real commodities and why things have been moving more to rent-based models, the good guys lost. They're not even on the table anymore. And that makes all of our current actions in politics one big, gigantic cope. Now, I actually am not sure I believe that, okay? I'm not telling you that's the truth, but I'm telling you that if we actually look at the implications of what we're saying sometimes, we're actually undercutting our own politics without acknowledging it. Because we're not being consistent. We're not looking at a purpose for what we're doing. We're not trying to go through that purpose consistently because it's too hard. It's too hard on your self-identity. It's not something you can do to yourself. I'm not even sure it's smart to do. I mean, if you really do it, it is kind of to mention Lovecraft is probably the wrong metaphor here, but it's true. If you collate all the conditions and look at it, it makes you feel hopeless. Ironically, if you want to actually do something about the world, you need to get close to doing that. But if you go all the way, it does feel daunting. Work through anything to its full logical capacity, and it starts to make into one can easily get in what they call Hotel Grand Abyss, which is why I talk about probable futures. We don't really know all the conditions in a chain of events of causality to know what the future is going to be enough to say for sure that the good guys lost ultimately. But we also have to be honest about what the likely logical implications of what we're saying are. What I find ironic is most of the people who are, I'm going to flash J.M. Cologne's argument here because he's in the chat, and I actually am going to psychologize this for a minute. To be honest, it's the other way around. Output productivity has gone down in the neoliberal period because people financialized. They didn't do it because they had. They didn't do it because they had to do for a profitability crisis. Except for there was a profitability crisis which really hit with the oil shock before they financialized. You know this, John Michael Cologne. You believe in hope of hopes because you're a libertarian socialist, but a libertarian nonetheless, that the political calculus, ironically, for someone who doesn't really believe in politics in that way, is the actual determinative factor. That is why things like MMT are appealing. It makes your political beliefs and your ability to manage society actually something you can manage by a single vector currency. All you have to do is have the right planners implement that currency, and never mind that it would actually completely change the entire network of social relations in such a way that no one would ever allow that to happen. But it makes it politically determinative, and you can have good guys and villains, and there's a nice moral view of history. Statistically speaking, any implied moral view of history is likely to be wrong. The subject of history is history, meaning there is no subject at all. The teleologies we imply, the meanings that we give, the things that we think we must do are things we can organize towards. But they are meanings we impose on the world. Their likelihood of reality is pretty low. Yet, social organization seems pretty much impossible without them. Right. I mean, wouldn't the good guys losing imply that the general contradictions of capitalism have been overcome? No, it could also imply that they've collapsed. For example, if you look at the kinds of societies that emerged in late antiquity, they did not overcome their transitions. They collapsed. And in fact, the value judgment and overcome and collapse is because we are looking at this from a humanistic point of view, which I think we should, by the way. But if you really think about the implications of that, overcome implies that we've moved beyond it. Well, no, maybe it just doesn't function anymore. One of the implications of the non-motor production theory of the USSR is that societies can be incoherent and fail. Let's get back to the purpose here. Because most of what we're doing is the prestidigitations of words again. You're getting addicted to concepts and not what the concepts actually describe. Esri from Model Science and I talk a lot about the need for universal acid. And it's not postmodernism. It's just realizing that our concepts are not the same as what they describe. We cannot deduce conceptually a truth that necessarily has any relation or coherence to the physical world. We can only prove that something doesn't make sense that way. Deductive knowledge is pretty much only useful negatively. That was one of the biggest, strikes against claims of positive knowledge and the ends of positivism. All right. we get into the way it's used in the Frankfurt School, and it can be highly mystified and weird and very hard to understand what they mean. But in a very simple way, just probability itself, that I don't think people actually sit with this enough, indicates that there are certain things that we just cannot know all the variables for. You can be accurate or you can be precise, but you have a hard time being both. These are things from 20th century science that we just want to make go away because it's inconvenient for ideologies that were established in the 19th century. Then you might go, as many people ask them, well, why do you believe in Marxism? I don't really believe in Marxism. I believe that Marx, as a thinker, had some fundamental insights that he got mainly from looking at other thinkers and doing immanent critique that enables us to understand history and human relations a lot clearer. I also think that certain economic concepts out of Marxism are the best proxy for explanations for the complex events we see in society. I do not, for example, believe everything in capital. One example where I actually agree with the MMTers, for example, is that money emerged out of markets that had cost, and this actually matters. What does it mean for markets to have cost? They have a cost of creation. You needed a collective agent to enforce them. Individual barter really turns into a formalized market because the values that one has intersubjectively are highly subjective and context dependent and are hard to standardize. To standardize a market and to enforce standardizations usually requires something like a state, at least the beginnings of a state, and it's probably part of the origins of the state itself. Thus, to regulate those transactions and also to protect those transactions from other systems from outside, you collectivize into formal systems to adjudicate that. So, do you think Marxism is a World 3 structure? That's a good question. I'm going to make sure I understand what you mean by that. You mean a three? Are you referring to three worlds thesis and world systems theory, or are you referring to something else? So, one, nation states are not natural concepts. Economic boundaries are not totally don't totally have relations to nation states. The idea of things like proletarian nations are somewhat incoherent. It's kind of why they were used in fascism before they were used in Marxism. I don't say that as like a yeah. So one of the problems with I have a modern monetary theory is that so far it has not been able to really deal with international markets. Its powers are national, its law is national, and yes, the international law is agreement, but then you have to believe in something like power theory of value, that these laws can only be enforced by raw physical power. It's something that is strongly implied in a lot of Marxist monetary theory, but people don't want to believe in because it would imply not just nationalist stuff, but some deeply ugly stuff about why monetary sovereignty is dependent on the imperial core. It's why people say that it's dependent on it's one of the reasons why some Marxists say it's dependent on imperialism, because if it's correct, this is not even from, like a commodity theory of money, but if it's correct, um, one of the reasons why certain places can set their currency is they have a big enough internal market that the political controls can matter, whereas everyone else is subject to kind of arbitrary systems of international law where physical power, and by that I mean the number of guns you have, really dominates the system. Right? That's why I always talk about the Cecil Rhodes model. This is a good point. Considering the volumes of bullshit, textual exegesis on fundamental questions will always be necessary, but no one who does this correctly only does textual exegesis. This is actually a disagreement that I've had with people around Andrew Kleinman. And I'm just going to mention this in the most charitable way. Andrew Kleinman talks about the logically coherent definition is we should have as a scientific principle of exegesis. Well, logical coherence and it's just a proof of coherence. It means it can possibly be true. But there can be multiple logically coherent interpretations of a system. So that's not a good proxy for truth. However, if something is logically incoherent, it might be descriptively true in the sense that it's describing something real, but that can't be the way it actually works. So we have to divide this apart and really look at it in a myriad of ways. I do that is why I do so much Marxology, right? Not because I believe that if I just understand Marx enough, that's going to lead me to the truth. It's that I need to know what Marx is actually claiming to know if this one claim or not could even be true. And since there have emerged through political necessity, academic traditions, etc., this larger project, this larger projects that make fundamentally different claims about the meaning of parts in Marx, and that they were operating off of incomplete corpuses of information, but insisting that they had coherent systems. We have to go back to the source on understanding what these systems are. I do not for a moment actually think Marx, Engels, and Lenin actually exactly describe the same thing, nor do I believe, like certain people tried to argue in some of the far left in the 70s and 80s, that Marx and Engels were totally different. They're very, very close. But they have even differences of focus. Like Engels focuses more on nations, national history, anthropology. And Marx would actually farm out some, his political writings often on actual specific details of politics to Engels to ghostwrite it for him because he didn't know it. So there's all kinds. Someone's like, class position of academics distorts a lot of Marxology. Totally true. Although academic class position itself is a distorted position. It doesn't really fit in this is why stuff like the PMC concept starts to appeal to people, because it's actually a vaguer concept, but it blanket covers now I have something to call these weird positions that no one really knows how they work, even though they're ubiquitous in everyday life, like faculty of academics. Well, most academics aren't tenured and this, that, and the other. But what are academics exactly? They're not productive to capital, but they are socially necessary for capital circulation and for the training of certain kinds of labor and management. But the organization of the university doesn't actually seem that related to the larger economy. It actually seems to have a prior tradition which it is built upon. But I'm going to echo Colin Drum here. Blaming the modern dysfunction of academia on medieval structures is actually kind of unfair. Some of this is just modeled perfectly today. We also have to look at the fact that there's what is Marxist celebrity culture? What is BreadTube? What is your even relationship to me? Right? I mentioned earlier that all good teaching actually does rely on a social identification that is usually closer to parasocial. This is why let's talk about like why you can't violate certain norms as a teacher, why we insist on ethical norms of relationships. Okay? Because the social relationship or parasocial relationship implied in teaching is not one of equal power, because it's not one of equal responsibility on both sides. And it can't be. So if you say you're a peer to your student, you are actually failing your student for narcissistic reasons. Conversely, a lot of what we call parasocial relations are actually what I might be better identified as malformed or misunderstood parasocial relations, where there's a view of equality between the people. Now, I do believe in some formal sense that yes, we are equals in some abstract way, or equality is just not a concept that we should apply to such a thing. But that there's no way for me to have, as one person with a distributed relationship with a bunch of people who interact with him, but may not have even spoken to me in any meaningful way, and may just be, projecting something. That the power dynamic is going to be different and weird. I don't have that much power over you, actually, which is interesting. In fact, in some ways, you have more power over me. But that if I'm trying to take an educational role with you, I both need to be personable, trusting, give you things to build upon, but also very clear about what the relationship is and isn't, or what the quasi relationship is and isn't. It's funny that you guys think you can predict how a single thinker can be used. For example, someone saying Adorno can lead to some reactionary thinking. I totally agree, but so can Marx. So can anybody. Reaction, frankly, conservatism is a temperament. That's the weird rational core, to use that language, about things like Jonathan Haidt's, temperament. Conservatism is a temperament. It really doesn't have much substantive content, which is also why it doesn't work internationally or whatever. Leftism is kind of a temperament right now, although it does have more substantive comment. It usually has some kind of substantive commitments. But I talk about gusted popular sentiment, people buying into this, that ideology, into this, that, I'm a Marxist Leninist, I'm a Leninist, blah, 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 blah. A lot of this stuff has no relation. I mean, the best example of this is the fact that the Trotskyist organizations could not reconcile themselves after the fall of the Soviet Union, despite the fact the fall of the Soviet Union is why they split. There is the kind of apocryphal story about Mandel calling Tony Cliff and Tony Cliff telling him to fuck off, even though the reason why they weren't together was gone. It had collapsed, and they were both wrong about how it was going to happen. And in many ways, all the current Trotskyist things, one of the reasons why I think Trotskyism may be becoming unpopular is they insist on predictions and stuff that didn't happen. Read the transitional program. It predicts the imminent collapse of capitalism in the 1950s. I've been pushing back on a lot of Marxists to make hard predictions on even though I'm a believer into the declining rate of profits. I'm like, you don't know how it's going to play out, and don't stop pretending that you do, because every time that we pretended that we knew what it meant, we've been wrong. Yeah, the narcissism of small differences explains a lot, but it doesn't explain all of it. Like the narcissism of small, actually, it does explain a lot of it, but the narcissism of small differences is deeper than just the differences. So, not to go into, I'm not going to talk about this in psychoanalytic terms. I'm going to talk about it in terms of terror management. The narcissism of small differences is because our identification with our ideas is not about our relationship to power. It's about projections against instability and terror. Fundamental thing that this is something that I think differently than most other Marxists is I actually do take both a social constructive view of the way we interact in society, but I think a lot of our interactions to ideas are pre-capitalist. They're based on things that are more fundamental than that. And in fact, they've been hijacked in the system. This I agree with John Michael Cologne on profoundly. And this was one of the things in our conversation came up the other day. So when I feel that we don't have a purpose anymore, this is why this all relates to purpose. Let me get back on topic, because I'm not going to be on more than an hour tonight. I'm going to announce the changes here and then talk about what may or may not be coming. When I talk about the lack of purpose in media and about how these kind of turn into grifts, like they start spinning their own reel, like the justification is more clicks, I fight that in myself. I want my ideas to be popular because I do think in a very real sense that some of these things would help people to have. But if I start trying to be popular by telling people what they already want to hear and chasing popularity in and of itself, I am likely to eventually be unable to know what my ideas are and what I'm doing to pander to spread my ideas, even though I've fundamentally changed what I believed to do so. And I've seen this happen to people over and over and over again. Before I got into this, I actually said to Doug Lane, this was about 6 years ago, God forbid we ever start making money from this. It'll fundamentally pervert our incentives to be honest. And even if we are honest, it'll, what would it, what would it even do? Like we would be changing our relationship to general society. Now, I make money off this. I have to commodify this to spread it. But, I just have to make enough to justify doing it as a hobby. If, I'm not that I don't say this as an aesthetic form. If you guys would make me rich, that'd be great. But really, that's what I have. I have to keep my eye on the prize. What's the reason why I'm doing this? The reason why I'm doing this is to help people and to help myself even think more clearly about the situation, so I don't get caught up in gust of political and popular sentiment that are going to lead nowhere and waste my time. I don't want to get caught up in the whatever notions are clouding our heads at any given moment. And I want people to be able to apply that to other areas of their life. If they do organizing, I want them to be able to do organizing in this way. That's my goal. That's why I don't have a micro niche, interview subject. But if I'm just interviewing because it's part of the interview circuit and I just have to have people on the show, and if I do two interview guests a week, that is what it will be. Just from just from pure numbers, then the purpose of this is not that anymore. The purpose of this is this itself. So there's a lot of speculation about my relationship to Zero Books. I am on the book staff and I am on the media staff. I'm one of the few people other than Doug Lane that's on both. I literally read the proposal for every book that comes to Zero. I do not necessarily read all the final versions of the books. There are constant books that I forget that I read that I see out there. I'm like, did I approve that? I had a crisis because, if I'm honest, Theorizing with a Hammer has a devoted but minority audience over at Zero. I don't really know how to improve that, and I think it's not long for this world. I think Pop the Left, and I'm speaking just for myself, cannot decide if it wants to be historical or current political commentary show. And if its historical focus is going to be the historical events or the theoretical history. of the show. And it's not Doug Lane's fault why that is the way, and it's not my fault. It's part of our interactions. It's part of what we want for our audience, etc., and so forth. Doug Lane and I have been negotiating the future of these ventures for a week. I cannot speak on what the outcome is until tomorrow. Or not tomorrow, Saturday. But there will be changes. There will also be changes here on Varg Blog, but for different reasons. I want to diversify the kinds of interviews I do. The activist space isn't actually what Zero Books has ever aimed for, and I think it's like that's actually been stated over and over again. In fact, the activist space doesn't. I'm going to say something that you aren't going to like, but the activist space is like church. It's preaching to the converted, and it's converted who, because they have put in physical hours, don't want to be told that what they might be doing have been a waste of time. Whenever you hear people focus on praxis without thinking about what praxis really meant, right? Like praxis, historically speaking, and this is before Marxism, is a combination of theoria. Actually, excuse me, it's the action based on theoria. And theoria is different from philosophy. Theory is the implied form of philosophy. So the applied, not the implied, the applied form of philosophy. So theory is philosophy's implications that you can do something with. Praxis is actually embodying that. The idea that praxis is just what you do, and if you just do it, like that doesn't actually, it leads to action for action's sake and unthinking action, which can actually is very useful for the status quo to have a bunch of activists like doing the same shit they've always done that doesn't work because they've always done it. It's a very useful means of passive control. Why don't I street protest anymore? Because everybody street protests and very little changes. But it makes you feel like you're doing something. You feel like you're building something for something. There's action, and action is, by the way, as a writer, I use action to deceive you. Because it's more interesting than stasis. I work with activists, as a side note. My partner is a major activist. I also work in a union. I used to be an AR rep, and if I still was, I wouldn't be doing this because I wouldn't have time. I am also probably the exact wrong person to be a media celebrity. Like, I can't mask my emotions on my face except for my dead face stare. I have a good dead face stare. And that doesn't betray my emotions, but everything else, any reaction that I do, you're going to instantly know what I think. You know, people are, you know, it's hard. You can actually sometimes see in interviews when I start like feeling like I've lost the thread, or the interviewee has lost the thread, and I might even be making them look bad, and eventually you can see my posture change. And so it's one of the ironies of me talking about this parasociality stuff. And I'm always like, you know, you might have to keep your sociality to yourself. I am innately, naturally shitty at it. You know what I actually think. When I get mad, it's real. And in fact, that's bad. Like a lot of people like that. Good Varn is, you know, mad Varn is best Varn. Well, mad Varn is closer to having a heart attack. What should you do? I mean, one of the things that people keep asking me is what should you do? And I want you guys to think you have to be involved. All right. This is where I am different than some other people who say some of the same things I do. You have to be involved in these civic organizations. You have to be, because just to know what people actually think and believe and how to interact with them. You can't be cordoned off in your own micro niche milieu. So you got to go out and you actually have to work with activists. You actually have to have a job if you can get one. I'm not going to shame anyone for not having a conventional job, but but it's not. This is not a time of labor short of excuse me of this is a time where as a labor market you actually have some power for whatever reason, although not as much as you probably should. And in fact, it is sort of disheartening because from the classical model of what would create good conditions for workers, this should be it. COVID should be the best time to have been able to strike, and it wasn't. But whatever. So, back to the Zero Books thing. I'm in negotiations with Doug because I don't know that I necessarily always make sense over there. And honestly, most channels are about a parasocial relationship with one figure. And when people thought I was an extension of Doug Lane, I didn't give as much hostility as when they think that I am opposed to him. And neither are completely true. Doug and I have been in a relationship of colleagueness for a long, long time, before Zero Books. And we've often been at odds, famously so in the lore, right? But it's created our political images, and increasingly that's diverged. That's a separate topic. I don't know what else to say about that except that there are changes coming, and I suspect that I will be proceeding with working with Zero in some capacity in the future. I don't know if it's going to be part of the media team, and I think the media over there itself is going to change, and I can't speak to more about that because it's not my decision how it changes. Over here, I'm going to be doing more diverse interviews in terms of topic and in terms of and I already do pretty diverse interviews, but I want more literature, more culture, more stuff like that, so that you guys are exposed to different ways of thinking. That's what this is for. It's not to propagate any line. In fact, I don't know the line to propagate. And people who tell you that they do, I think are normally just not telling the truth. So it's very hard to see what the relationship is. I somebody said the union of the rank and file. The union of the rank and file of what? So the rank and file of the union. I'm not going to script stuff. I actually did for Zero for a while. I was scripting my initial Theorizing with a Hammer. And I did a lot of scripting in the early days for Pop the Left too. The reason why I don't do it is because I sound like a robot when I read a script, and they tend to get edited. And so things that I think are important get cut out. But I am working on a book that will be fairly scripted, like it's necessarily so, because it's not just mine. My co-author who is shy, and unfortunately shy, because she's brilliant. And sometimes when I'm going on speaking, I feel bad because I feel like I'm stealing a woman's content, but she tells me to represent us. And that's hard, right? I mean, that dynamic. I've been thinking about that too a lot because I've always wanted to have more women on my show, but even you guys act differently, and I don't mean in a creepy way. You guys are not like catcalling in my in my comments. I'm not what I'm saying. You don't say misogynist things to my guest, but the interaction changes, and I think this is something we have to deal with. Left media is overwhelmingly male. It tends to be white, but even the whiteness is not nearly as pronounced as the maleness. And when you see a lot of cis female figures on the left, they tend to have different concerns than working mothers do. A book name is the working title is A Lash for the Left, and it's an evaluation of Christopher Lasch. When it's going to be released is also kind of what I'm talking about today, because I'm spending so much time streaming and whatnot to not to write. I have read something like 2,000 pages for this book, and rereading all the Lasch books and reading all these articles and doing interviews with some of his students to make sure that like I'm interpreting it correctly, what all that is. And Shallon's been doing the same thing, and even more so, she's done more interviews. She did most of the interviews so far. That's why I'm reading them as opposed to doing them. We're trying to make like 130-page book too, which is kind of hilarious. Like, we're trying to make a little approachable book, but we're doing so much work to do it. I treat it like writing a monograph and then taking all the monographedness out. Like, I'm gonna create something that's intellectually solid and rock hard, and then make it really approachable. That's actually probably a bad way to write a book that's made for a popular audience, in the sense that people want it turned over fast. I'm also just a slow writer. I'm dyslexic and aphasic. For real, that's a real thing. And it's a limit. If you watch my Twitter, because it's like, wait, that tweet doesn't make any sense. He's missing like 5 words. Why is Varn so obscure? Well, because I'm aphasic, and quick writing and short bursts is terrible for me. I need to be able to refine stuff over and over and over again, and it takes time. I took 10 years to write my first book of poetry. And have a 40-hour a week job. Guys, I'm a department head. Like, it's anyway. But whatever. I don't make my living from the streams, and if I did, I think I would suck. So yeah. I just work on the book on the stream. I do sometimes, actually. That's what those Lasch episodes over at Regrettable Century and at Zero are actually about. I'm totally scattered. No, for real. I'm actually very good at a very concise 15 minutes. That's what Theorizing with a Hammer was playing on, is like, there's 15 minutes, there's one thing, we just got to go and do it. Okay. I've talked to Doug Lane talked to me about resurrecting Theorizing with a Hammer here. I don't think it fits in here. I don't think it's really what I do over here at Varn Blog. I mean, this is a vlog. This is not a 15-minute. This is interviews and me talking to the air. So what's the major changes as far as what's coming up on here on Varn Blog? Because you guys are obviously here. I want to grow this audience, but I want to grow it organically and even slowly. I'm not interested in being super non-sectarian, and I'm not interested in being sectarian. Like, it's actually an interesting stance that I agree with TIR, This is Revolution, on not attacking people, on not being the personal circular firing squad a lot of the time, unless someone's really a bad faith actor. And I do research to find that out. I don't just act off my gut. All right. Night, Adrian. And so here's what's changing here. Regrettable and Century and I are going to be doing a co-release podcast. We're still debating all the things, but it's going to be on what we call social technologies. Yeah, no, but it's better to tech ideas than people. It really is. I mean, people are going to take an attack on ideas and an attack on them anyway. But if you get lost in like, this person's an asshole. Well, most people are assholes. I'm kind of an asshole. Let's be honest. People, I mean, there's people in this chat who've known me for forever who'd be like, "Bah, Varn. Varn was mean to me." I blocked famous people on Facebook before they were famous because I'm a jerk and they were being a jerk back. Adam, Kevin, which one? So there's going to be a Regrettable Century stream here. There's also going to be a Gene Vagilon stream here. Hi, Gene. He's in the thing. And I was about to announce that on Tabletop Games. I've announced it before. It's going to be released with This Is Revolution. I'm going to be doing a lot of collaborative projects with people from different groups. Plus, I'm still attached to Emancipation Network. Yeah, I'm hard to know in real life, man. I'm ranty and yelly, and like the interaction you see with like me and Tom O'Brien over at from Alpha to Omega's reading group series, that's probably what you're more likely to get in real life. Like, like I'll just yell at you and leave. Except when I have a position of responsibility, because I've been, I'm a department head, and I try to be one that's not awful. So I don't take my personal vices out on my staff. I also try to be nice to my producers because they do a lot of work for me, and no matter how much I pay them, I probably underpay them. So that's what's changing. I'm also doing, so there's going to be those two things. One's going to be on the podcast feed. It won't be here. And one's going to be here and also on This Is Revolution. And I'll also be on their podcast feed too. So there's more co-branded material. I'm not going to, everything in a school incentivizes control because of the dynamics of managing that many people in that kind of situation. And so you're not wrong. I don't think teachers are cops in a one-to-one relationship, but we're not totally not. Yeah, I want to do more with TIR. So that'll be good. I love the This Is Revolution guys. I disagree slightly on their emphasis on non-sectarianism because I do think we should attack ideas, but I agree with them that we shouldn't attack people. Oh, Adam from Red Library. Yeah, I like Adam. So that'll happen. There will be 2 to 4 interviews on the podcast. I think my podcast interviews are better because they're cleaner, more concise. However, a couple times a month, I will do these 4-hour streams with a guest, like I did with JMC, with the right people and the right topic, and with a true interaction, like with people I know and trust myself and have a long rapport with. Those are fun. Those are good. I can't do it all the time if I do too much of them. My thoughts on Finland's school system. That's off. Attack all ideas. No, I leave no idea unattacked. So I just want to focus, like when a stream, I want to be a stream where we interact with the audience. That makes terrible podcast content. Like I'm going to rip this out and give it to my patrons, and I'm going to feel bad about it because like they can't read what you're saying and they only know my half of the conversation. So it's like hearing half of a phone call. And streams are very ephemeral. I like to make product that is around for a while. But I am going to still do the streams because I think Pascal did enough that I actually did the stream on him, making me think about my own position, because prior to Pascal talking, it was closer to Besner's, if I'm completely honest. So I'm going to do that. So there'll be 4 to 6 of them a month. I will do a few streams a month. I'm still going to be doing patron episodes of the 2 a month that I promised. So that's still a lot, but maybe not 4 streams. I think I'm not sure how many streams I'm going to do a month actually. It might be as low as 2, or it might be more of these personal ones that are about an hour and a half long. So it's going to be your choice. This is a vlog after all. I feel kind of like I misnamed it because it started off as a vlog, then it was an interview show, and I was like, well, that's weird. Seems like I'm being super arrogant. I was more just like, my last name is monosyllabic, and so is vlog, and they both start with V. Cool, but whatever. Justify your own narcissism, however you want to do it, right? I need to remind myself of my own purpose, though. It is not to be famous. I'm the wrong person to be famous. I'm a 40-year-old dude. I should not be hip. One thing I will say is leftists have a tendency to generalize where they shouldn't, because people have a tendency to generalize where they shouldn't. I see a lot of stuff about teachers. No, I don't release my anger on my students. Really, I don't. You can ask them. Tuggy said point out Varn. Okay. I'm not, guys aren't here because I'm cool. Affected cool is always like a way to tell like a bad teacher too. If you guys consider me cool and hip, that's on you. I can barely dance. I'm a 230-pound 40-year-old man. Give you my stats. Who like sometimes power lifts in his spare time, but often like gets bored. That's what I do. I shouldn't be cool. And since COVID, I've just I'm on stream all the time. I can literally see all my COVID weight in my face. It's kind of disturbing. I'm not hard on myself, actually. I really like me. I just don't like to pretend that I'm something that I'm not. And if I am, then that's great, but we're gonna get into the semantics of hip and cool. That is not my purpose this evening. My purpose was to be serious. I can't ever stay serious with you guys. I was thinking about this the other day. One of the differences between me on here and me on other podcasts is like I actually do kind of like my audience, but but I also have to be like, but that flatters me. Of course, I would like my audience. They're my audience. Duh. But you guys tend to have a good sense of humor about you. So those are the major changes. So to recap, less streams, and the streams are going to be streams. They're going to be like this. They're going to be with a guest where we can have a long conversation. More podcasts, and they're going to be on Buzzsprout and the Patreon. If you're a subscriber to Patreon people get it first, but they'll be on Buzzsprout as well. And I'm going to be better about Patreon content. Right now, my patrons are getting a lot of my archive work and a few things, but I'm going to be better about actually delivering the streams to them only. Oh, I like shiny. Someone pays attention to my Twitter. So I will do that as far as stream content, but I'll do it. We'll do it less often because you can't. I work a 40-hour-a-week job. I'm writing a book. I really can't just be on. I can't have a constantly running parasocial relationship with you. We just can't. So that's where we're going to be. So more podcast streams are going to actually be streams. They're not going to be podcasts that I just let you talk over. And I'll be working more with TIR. I'll be working more with Regrettable Century, both of which are going to be, some of which will be here. can't speak to what's happening at Zero yet, but no, Doug Lane and I are not totally at odds. Like, that's a myth, even if sometimes you can't tell from the way I talk. But changes are happening there, and like I said earlier, I don't know what they're going to be. I just know they're coming, and I don't want anyone thinking that you have to pick sides in some kind of great parasocial war, because that's the absolute last thing that I want to happen. I'm tired of that shit. I'm tired of rat beef models of growth. I'm tired of splitting the baby. I'm tired of all that stuff. Okay. I'm going to go take a nap. Why do leftists have such radical... I've often wondered that, Jonathan. Because a lot of them do have really pedestrian basic, and that's kind of a new thing. I think social media and fandoms are part of it, and I think because a lot of the left actually functions like a scene or a fandom, that's really what's going on. Yeah. But regardless, such is life. Thank you guys for your time tonight. I hope you got something out of it. I'm going to go take a break. I'm recording podcasts on Sunday, but they won't be released at the same time. So there's that. And I am going to have a lot of material coming out for you guys soon enough. Next month is when the Gene Badgelon show on games, and probably maybe the first of the Regrettable Century collabs come out. So I want to model my style of engagement by being pluralistic in who we talk to. And I'm going to try to diversify more literature, more stuff like that on this channel, as well as what you're used to. I got a lot of stuff in education, because if that's what I'm trying to do, and also that's what my day job is, and that's really my specialty. That, like, I have a bunch of expertise, but that's what I use the most in my day-to-day life. I should do more with it, right? So stuff coming out on that. Take care. Be wise in your parasocial relationships, and try to have a purpose in what you're doing. And don't fool yourself. There's a quote by Ambrose Bierce. I might actually read it to you. Let me get it up. And that's going to be what I end off on tonight. Be as decent as you can. Don't believe without evidence. Treat divine things with marked respect. Don't have anything to do with them. Do not trust humanity without collateral security. It will play you some scurvy trick. Remember, it hurts no one to be treated as an enemy entitled to respect until he shall prove himself a friend worthy of affection. Cultivate a taste for distasteful truth. And finally, most important of all, endeavor to see things as they are, not as they ought to be. Ambrose Bierce. That's my advice to all of you. Good night.